The transport ship rattled as it descended through the dense atmosphere, its reinforced hull groaning under the pressure. Callan Voss sat shackled to a steel bench, his wrists bound with energy cuffs that hummed softly. Across from him, a hulking reptilian warrior smirked, his scaled skin bearing the deep scars of 100 battles. "First time in the pits, human?" the reptile sneered, his forked tongue flicking between jagged teeth. Callan didn't respond. He had learned long ago that words meant little in places like this. The ship landed with a bone-rattling thud, and the restraints disengaged with a metallic hiss. The loading ramp groaned open, revealing a vast coliseum bathed in golden artificial sunlight. Towering walls of dark obsidian loomed overhead, lined with banners depicting champions long dead. The scent of blood, sweat, and something acrid lingered in the air. Callan stepped forward, his boots crunching against the sand, absorbing the sounds of distant roars and the clang of steel on steel. A squad of armored enforcers waited at the entrance, their reflective visors concealing any trace of emotion. Leading them stood a towering figure, General Korak. His crimson exoskeleton gleamed under the artificial sun, the long ridges along his head resembling a battle-worn crown. He regarded Callan with a mixture of amusement and curiosity. "So this is the human," Korak mused, his deep voice carrying the weight of command. "They say your kind are fragile. Yet I hear stories that contradict that." Callan met his gaze without flinching. "Then you've heard right." A low chuckle rumbled from the general's chest. "We shall see." The enforcers led Callan through the labyrinthine corridors beneath the arena. The walls pulsed with ancient energy, the glow of embedded power lines casting eerie shadows. Other gladiators watched as he passed, hulking brutes with cybernetic limbs, multi-eyed assassins sharpening curved blades, reptilian warlords whispering in their guttural tongues. Some scoffed, others simply turned away. They all made the same mistake, underestimating him. At last he was brought to the preparation chambers, where warriors readied themselves for battle. Weapons lined the walls, brutal instruments designed to maim and entertain the bloodthirsty spectators above. A mechanical voice crackled over the intercom. "New challenger. First match imminent." Korak stepped forward, studying Callan with a critical eye. "Tradition dictates that newcomers fight to prove their worth. Lose and you are fodder. Win and you live another day." Callan's gaze flicked to the massive steel gate ahead, where he could hear the roar of the crowd beyond. "Who am I fighting?" The gate creaked open. A massive four-armed brute stomped forward, its thick hide covered in ritual scars. The crowd erupted in cheers, chanting the creature's name. "Torgax the Breaker." Korak's mandibles twitched in what might have been a grin. "Try not to die too quickly." Callan stepped forward, rolling his shoulders as the gate slammed shut behind him. The sand beneath his feet was damp with blood, some fresh, some old, long dried into the cracked earth. The Colosseum's energy shields shimmered overhead, trapping him inside. Torgax let out a guttural laugh, flexing his four muscular arms. "A human? They insult me." The beast lunged, swinging a hammer the size of Callan's torso. He sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the blow as the weapon cratered the ground. Dust exploded into the air. The crowd roared. Torgax moved fast for something so large. He swung again, his upper arms leading while his lower ones reached to grab. Callan ducked, sliding beneath the massive brute and planting his boot into the back of its knee. Torgax stumbled but recovered, his snarl turning to fury. Callan didn't wait. He surged forward, grabbed a fallen blade from the dirt, and drove it into the soft flesh beneath Torgax's ribcage. The beast howled, jerking back in pain, but Callan was already moving. He twisted the blade, then wrenched it free, crimson ichor spilling onto the sand. Torgax staggered. The crowd fell into stunned silence. Then, with a final burst of speed, Callan leaped, driving the blade deep into the creature's throat. Torgax's eyes widened in shock before he collapsed with a thunderous crash. Silence. Then the arena exploded into noise. Korak watched from above, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The other gladiators, who had once mocked the human, now studied him with something closer to unease. Callan retrieved his blade, flicking away the blood. He looked up at the thousands of spectators, at the alien warriors who had dismissed him as weak. They wouldn't make that mistake again. The scent of blood never truly faded from the arena corridors. It clung to the air, soaked into the very walls, mingling with the sweat and desperation of those who fought to live another day. Callan Voss had been in the pits for weeks now, and in that time, he had carved a path through the ranks with ruthless efficiency. The jeers of the first few matches had faded, replaced by wary silence. Warriors who had once dismissed him as weak now watched him with cautious eyes. Another fight. Another kill. Callan wiped his blade clean, ignoring the roar of the crowd above. The body of his latest opponent, a towering brute with skin like iron, lay motionless at his feet. The creature had lasted longer than most, but in the end they all fell the same. "Impressive," came a voice from the archway. Callan turned to see General Korik leaning against the stone wall, arms crossed, his mandibles twitching in what could have been approval or suspicion. The veteran warrior had been watching him closely, as had the rest of the gladiator elite. They saw what the crowd did not. Callan wasn't like the others. He fought without flourish, without bravado. He didn't entertain. He ended fights as quickly and efficiently as possible, a trait that disturbed even the most hardened killers. "You fight like a machine," Korik observed, stepping forward. "No wasted movement. No hesitation. It is unnatural." Callan sheathed his weapon, unfazed. "Efficiency isn't unnatural. It's just uncommon." Korik studied him, his mandibles clicking softly. "You are not like the others. They fight for glory. You fight for something else." "I fight to survive." The general chuckled, though there was little amusement in it. "Survival here is temporary. The more you win, the more enemies you make. Sooner or later, someone will come for you, human. Then I'll kill them too." Korik's gaze darkened, but he said nothing more. Instead, he turned and strode away, leaving Callan alone in the blood-stained sand. Word of his victory spread. The betting odds on his fight shifted. Warriors who had once mocked him now avoided his gaze. The weak sought alliances, whispering in the dim corridors, hoping to find a way to end him before he climbed any higher. The strong, those who had ruled the pits for years, began to see him as a threat. The first real challenge came a few nights later. Callan had just finished a match when he was summoned to the underground training halls. The arena enforcers escorted him through the dim tunnels until they reached a massive chamber lined with racks of alien weaponry. At its center stood a warrior unlike any he had faced before. V.Best the Red, Korik's second in command, a towering brute with serrated armor fused to his flesh and a plasma-forged axe that had ended more lives than Callan could count. "You've made enemies human," V.Best rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "Some think you need to be taught a lesson before you grow too bold." Callan's fingers flexed at his sides, but he remained still. "Is that why you're here? To teach me?" V.Best grinned, revealing teeth sharpened to points. "No. I'm here to see if you're worth keeping alive." The enforcer stepped back. The door sealed shut. The fight was not sanctioned, not for the crowds, it was for the gladiators themselves, a test, a warning. V.Best moved fast, faster than anything his size had a right to. The axe came down in a blur of motion, carving through the air where Callan had stood a moment before. He rolled, grabbing a short blade from a nearby rack, but V.Best was already on him again, a whirlwind of sheer force and power. The fight was unlike any before. V.Best didn't rely on brute strength alone. He was skilled, practiced, and relentless. Callan dodged, weaved, struck where he could, but the armor plating deflected his blows. A glancing hit caught him across the ribs, sending him stumbling. Pain flared, sharp and deep. V.Best laughed. "Not so fast now, are you?" Callan exhaled slowly, centering himself. He couldn't win with strength. He had to find an opening. V.Best charged again, his axe swinging wide, expecting Callan to evade. This time, Callan stepped in, closing the distance, forcing the larger warrior off balance. A quick movement, a shift of weight, and suddenly V.Best was falling forward, momentum working against him. Callan drove his blade between the gaps in his armor, deep into his side. V.Best grunted in pain, staggering back, but Callan didn't stop. He twisted the blade, ripping it free in a spray of crimson before kicking the warrior to the ground. Silence filled the chamber. V.Best groaned, clutching his wound, and let out a rough, rasping laugh. "Well fought." The door opened. Korik stood in the entrance watching. He nodded once. "Enough," he ordered. The enforcer stepped in, hauling V.Best to his feet. He winced but did not protest. Korik turned his gaze to Callan. "You just earned yourself more than enemies, human. You earned their fear." Callan met his gaze. "Good." Korik studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "The grand tournament is coming. If you survive until then, you'll face the best this pit has to offer, including our reigning champion, Drazhul." Callan had heard the name. A warlord, undefeated, feared across the Colosseum. "I'll be ready," he said. Korik smirked. "We'll see." As the enforcers led V.Best away, Callan remained standing in the training hall, the scent of blood still fresh in the air. He had climbed high, but the real challenge was still ahead. And if fear was what kept the others in line, he would give them plenty to be afraid of. The arena had never been louder. Thousands of voices merged into a deafening roar, a storm of sound that shook the very ground beneath Callan's feet. The grand tournament had begun, and with it came the promise of glory, death, and something far more dangerous: recognition. Callan stood at the edge of the Colosseum's preparation chambers, watching as the first matches unfolded on the blood-stained sands. Towering screens projected the carnage for all to see. Alien warriors, monstrous and brutal, clashed with a ferocity that sent shivers through even the most seasoned fighters. The weak fell quickly, their bodies dragged away by mechanical drones before the next challengers were called forth. From the observation deck above, Korik and the other high-ranking officials of the arena watched in silence. Their eyes weren't on the fights but on those who had survived this long. The real contenders. "You feel it, don't you?" a voice rumbled beside him. Callan didn't turn. He had recognized Vekaz's presence long before he spoke. The massive warrior still bore the scar from their last encounter, a thin, jagged line running along his ribcage. It had not softened him. If anything, it had sharpened his gaze. "The tension," Vekaz continued. "Everyone knows only one will walk away as champion. The rest will be nothing more than memories." Callan exhaled slowly. "I'm not here to be a memory." Vekaz grinned, baring his sharpened teeth. "Then let's see if you can live up to that promise." A mechanical chime echoed through the chamber, silencing all conversation. The next combatants were being chosen. Callan's name flashed across the screen. He stepped forward without hesitation. The arena gates loomed before him, their thick steel trembling as the locks disengaged. Beyond them, the sand stretched out under the blinding artificial sun, every inch of it soaked with the battles of the past. As he stepped onto the battlefield, the crowd's cheers shifted, no longer dismissive, no longer mocking. This time they roared for him. A second gate opened across the Colosseum, and his opponent emerged. Raxor the Unchained. The beast was nearly twice Callan's size, its hulking form wrapped in spiked metal plating. Thick chains hung from its wrists, dragging across the ground like the remnants of a shattered past. Raxor had been a legend long before Callan had even arrived in the pits, a warrior with a reputation for breaking bones as easily as others broke bread. Callan tightened his grip on the twin daggers he had chosen for this match. Speed was his only advantage here. A horn blared. The fight began. Raxor charged like a living avalanche, his chains whipping through the air with a force that could shatter bone. Callan ducked the first strike, rolling to the side as the sand exploded where he had stood a moment before. The second strike came faster. Callan barely managed to twist away, the tip of the chain slicing a thin line across his forearm. Raxor grinned. Fast. Callan didn't respond. He was already moving. He closed the distance, his daggers flashing toward the beast's exposed side. But Raxor was ready. A backhanded strike caught Callan mid-motion, sending him skidding across the sand. Pain erupted along his ribs. The crowd howled. They smelled blood. Callan forced himself up, shaking the dizziness from his head. Raxor wasn't just strong, he was smart. He had fought countless quick opponents before and knew exactly how to deal with them. Which meant Callan had to be unpredictable. He darted forward again, but this time instead of attacking he feinted left, then right, then twisted under Raxor's swing, slicing along the tendons of the beast's massive leg. Raxor stumbled, momentarily off balance. Callan pressed the advantage. He slashed again, targeting the joints, the weak points in the armor. Raxor snarled, lashing out wildly. One of the chains clipped Callan's shoulder, sending a sharp jolt of pain down his arm, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Another cut. Another. Blood began to stain the sand. Raxor roared, his fury shaking the arena. He lunged, desperation fueling his attack. Callan sidestepped just enough. The beast's own momentum carried him forward, exposing his throat for the briefest of moments. It was all Callan needed. He drove both daggers deep into Raxor's neck, twisting with brutal precision. The beast's eyes widened in shock. A gurgling sound escaped his lips as he staggered backward, clutching at the blades. Then with one final exhale he collapsed. Silence fell over the Colosseum. Then the crowd erupted. Callan pulled his blades free, wiping the blood from his hands. He turned his gaze upward to the observation deck. Korik was watching, his expression unreadable. But Callan could feel it, the shift, the weight of something bigger than just another fight. This was no longer about survival. This was about proving he was the one they should fear. The chambers beneath the arena were silent. Not the kind of silence that came with peace, but the kind that settled before something inevitable, something final. Callan sat on the edge of the cot in his holding cell, his hands still stained with the blood of his last opponent. The water in the nearby basin was cold as he rinsed his skin clean, but it did little to rid him of the metallic scent that clung to him like a second skin. The fight with Raxer had changed everything. He had been watched before, studied by the gladiators, the crowd, the officials, but now there was something different in their gazes. Unease, recognition, fear. He had climbed higher than anyone had expected, and now the weight of that climb pressed down on him. He wasn't sure when he had started feeling it, but the further he rose, the more the others looked at him not as a warrior, but as something else entirely. The door slid open with a quiet hiss. Korik entered, moving with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator. His dark armor gleamed under the dim lighting, his mandibles twitching slightly as he studied Callan in silence. "You should be dead," he finally said. Callan dried his hands on a rag, meeting Korik's gaze without flinching. "A lot of people think that. They tend to be wrong." Korik took a step closer. "I have seen thousands fight in this arena. Thousands die. Some fast, some slow. The ones who last do so because they are stronger, faster, or luckier than the rest." His voice lowered. "You are none of these things." Callan said nothing. Korik studied him as if searching for something hidden beneath his skin. "You don't win because you're stronger. You don't win because you're faster. You win because you understand something the others don't." Still, Callan waited. Korik exhaled through his nostrils, pacing slowly. "I have fought humans before. They are fragile, soft, but they are also different. There is something in your kind, something unnatural." He turned, his eyes sharp. "You fight without hesitation. You kill without hesitation. Not like a warrior. Like something else. Like something that does not see life the way the rest of us do." Callan's expression didn't change. "You think I'm different? I know you are." Korik crossed his arms. "I have seen gladiators kill to survive. I have seen them kill for sport, for vengeance, for honor. But you kill because it is the only logical course of action. There is no hesitation, no conflict. Just execution." He leaned in slightly. "It is unnatural." Callan chuckled under his breath. "You think I'm unnatural because I'm efficient? No. I think you are unnatural because you are human." Korik's words hung between them, and for the first time since he had arrived in the pits, Callan felt something beyond the usual calculations, beyond the steady, controlled thoughts that guided his every move. He felt curiosity. Korik wasn't the first to call him a killer. Wasn't the first to question what made him different. But there was something in the way he spoke, something deeper than the usual fear or awe. "What do you think makes humans different?" Callan asked. Korik's mandibles twitched again. "It is not strength. It is not speed. It is not intelligence." He tilted his head. "It is the mind. The way your kind sees the world. The way you calculate, adapt, and destroy without hesitation." He took another step closer. "I have seen warriors hesitate at the brink of victory. I have seen them question the cost of their choices. But humans? When they fight, they do not hesitate. They do not stop. It is as if they have already decided the battle is won before it has even begun." Callan remained still. Korik's voice lowered. "You do not fight for survival, Callan Voss. You fight because that is what you were made to do." The silence stretched. Finally, Callan spoke. "Maybe you're right." Korik studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Tomorrow you fight Drashul." Callan already knew. "He will not hesitate," Korik said. "Neither will you." Callan exhaled slowly. "No, I won't." Korik lingered for a moment before turning toward the door. Before he left, he paused. "Perhaps that is why your kind is so feared," he said. "And why in the end you always win." The door slid shut behind him, leaving Callan alone with the silence once more. The tension in the Colosseum had changed. It was no longer the eager anticipation of bloodshed, nor the wild excitement of a spectacle. It was something heavier. Something colder. The gladiators in the waiting chambers spoke in hushed voices, their eyes flicking toward Callan when they thought he wasn't looking. He was used to being watched. Ever since his first victory, the others had studied him, trying to understand what made him different. But now there was no curiosity in their stares. Only fear. Drashul was dead. The champion. The undefeated. The legend. And Callan had killed him. It hadn't been a struggle. It hadn't been a desperate clash between titans. It had been a calculated, methodical execution. The fight had lasted less than 3 minutes. Now there were no whispered challenges, no arrogant gladiators eager to test themselves against the human. No one wanted to face him. No one wanted to see what would happen if they did. He sat alone in his chamber, sharpening his daggers. The steady rasp of metal against stone was the only sound in the suffocating silence. The door slid open. Korik entered, his heavy footsteps slow and deliberate. He did not speak immediately, and when he finally did, his voice was quiet. "They want you gone." Callan didn't look up. "Who?" "All of them." He set the blade down, finally meeting Korik's gaze. "I won. That's what this is about, isn't it? Winning?" Korik exhaled, a deep, almost weary sound. Winning is not the same as surviving. Callan considered that for a moment. He could see it clearly now, the inevitable conclusion of his rise through the ranks. It had never been about skill. It had never been about strength. It had always been about what he represented. He wasn't just a gladiator. He was a reminder. A living, breathing truth that no one wanted to acknowledge. Humans weren't supposed to be the strongest. They weren't supposed to be the fastest. They weren't supposed to be the best. And yet, time and time again they proved otherwise. "You could leave," Korik said. Callan almost laughed. "And go where?" "Someplace where they will not fear you." "There is no such place." Korik studied him for a long time. "Then you already know how this ends." Callan nodded. "A final match. Not an official one. Not one for honor or sport or the entertainment of the masses. It would be all of them. Every gladiator in the Colosseum. Every warrior who had ever stepped onto the sands. Against him. It would not be a fight. It would be an execution." Callan picked up his daggers and twirled them between his fingers, feeling the familiar weight of them. "They fear me," he said. "But do they understand why?" Korik didn't answer. The door closed behind him, leaving Callan with the silence once more.